Hi there, Alison here with another Cab Franc du jour. Today's wine is taking us to the region of Peumo in Chile's Cachapoal Valley, and we're looking at the Viña La Rosa 2021 Cornellana Volcano Sedimentario Cabernet Franc. Chile's oldest winery, Viña La Rosa, was established in 1824 by Francisco Ignacio Ossa y Mercado, grandson of a Basque-native and mining entrepreneur from Northern Chile. And when he was drawn to the natural beauty of the Cachapoal region, he decided to purchase a farm and vineyards here that happened to be owned at the time by Chile's first president, Manuel Blanco Encalada. Today, the Ossa family's sixth generation are leading Viña La Rosa with the same passion for the land that inspired Francisco Ossa some 200 years ago. And it is indeed this passion and respect for the land that is at the core of what this winery represents today. An 100% estate producer, farming an impressive 600 hectares of vines, both with organic and sustainable certifications across their 3 estates in Peumo. In the cellar, the team is led by head winemaker Gonzalo Cárcamo, who's been with La Rosa since 1998, and he's supported in the cellar by winemaker Cynthia Ortiz Vidal. And Viña La Rosa is very passionate about Cabernet Franc. They're farming 53 hectares of Cabernet Franc vines, and while that may not seem like a lot in relation to their total acreage, this actually represents 1/3 of the Cabernet Franc planted in all the Cachapoal Valley. And from these 53 hectares, they are making 6 single varietal Cabernet Francs, and the grape plays an important role in their top red wine, the Ossa Red Blend. And alongside Carbonera, Cabernet Franc is their flagship variety in their top single vineyard wine ranges, including the La Rosa range, as well as the La Capitana single vineyard, and their newest wine range, the Cornellana Volcano Sedimentario project, which is the Cabernet Franc that we're looking at today. So Viña La Rosa and their vineyards are located in the Peumo Dio, which is in Chile's Cachapoal Valley, which is one of 5 regions that make up the larger Central Valley. And the Cachapoal Valley encompasses the northern part of the larger Rapel River Valley, and it's bordered to the north by the region of Maipo and to the south by the region of Colchagua. And when looking at the climate of the Cachapoal Valley, as is the case with almost all of Chile's wine-growing regions, a region or subregion's proximity to the Pacific Ocean in the west or the Andes Mountains in the east can be more important in determining that region's climate than latitude, which is why we see terms like costa, meaning coast, or entre cordilleras or Andes to indicate where the grapes are coming from and the possible climate that that area experiences. So in the case of the Cachapoal Valley, this is a U-shaped wine-growing region, and it's bordered to the west by the coastal range, Chile's coastal range, the Cordilleras de Costa, and to the east by the Andes Mountains. And because of this, all of the subregions in the Cachapoal Valley either fall under the Entre Cordilleras or Andes zones, which means that the Cachapoal Valley is the only region in the Central Valley that does not have any vineyards or subregions in the Costa zone. So in terms of the climate of the Cachapoal Valley, it is a Mediterranean climate, like many of Chile's wine-growing regions. So we are looking at warm to hot summers, mild winters, and relatively low rainfall. But there are, of course, some important nuances here. So because of this U-shaped position of the valley and this more north-south orientation, the Cachapoal Valley is able to receive a lot more easily the cool air that gets funneled down from the Andes Mountains. And because of this, the region as a whole has a slightly cooler microclimate overall, particularly compared to the region of Colchagua to the south. Now, the coolest areas will be in the westernmost or easternmost part of the region when we're in the foothills of either the coastal range or the Andes Mountains at slightly higher elevations. And the warmest area will be on the valley floor at the lowest elevations. And the elevation of the region ranges from around 150 meters above sea level to about 900 meters above sea level. In terms of soils, on the valley floor, we tend to find richer alluvial silt loams and clay loams. And then as you move into the foothills, the soil patchwork becomes much more diverse and complex. We tend to find more stony, shallow soils in the foothills, and they can be, in the Andes range, we're looking at granitic sands and gravels, and then in the coastal range, we will find stony silts or clays of either volcanic or granitic origin, depending on where you are. Now, looking a little bit more closely at the Peumo Dio specifically, this is actually one of the best known subregions in Chile, and its calling card is Carmenere, which actually represents about 50% of the area under vine in the region. That said, as is evident from La Rosa's work with Cabernet Franc, this grape too has adapted very well to the conditions here in Peumo. So it's worth looking at some of the key nuances that influence viticulture here. So the region of Peumo is in the westernmost part of the Cachapoal Valley, and we're about 150 kilometers south of the capital city of Santiago, and we're about 65 kilometers east inland from the Pacific Ocean. And the region is in the foothills of the coastal mountain range, the Cordilleras de Costa, and because of this, we have elevations of around 200 to 300 or so meters above sea level. And because of that elevation, we do experience a wider diurnal range in temperatures, so cooler evenings to offset the warmer daytime temperatures. In addition to this, the region is located on the north side of the Cachapoal River, right at the base of that U shape, just as the Cachapoal River is starting to take a dogleg towards the northeast. And because of this, Peumo is able to receive not only the cool breezes that come down from the Andes Mountains, but it is close enough to the Pacific Ocean that is also able to receive the cooling influence from the Pacific Ocean, particularly in the afternoons. So we have two cooling influences here that help to moderate conditions, slow down ripening, and extend the growing season. In addition to this, Peumo also experiences a little bit more precipitation than some other parts of the Cachapoal Valley, around 600 millimeters of precipitation annually. So we have a couple cooling influences here. We have more rainfall as well, and that's also very good for Cabernet Franc. And because of the fact that we are in the foothills here, we will have a more undulating landscape. And so there will certainly be sites that will be warmer sites, hotter sites that would benefit Carmenere. But conversely, there will also be sites that are a little bit cooler that will be better for Cabernet Franc. In terms of soils across Peumo, we have colluvium of volcanic origin, and we also have very stony silts and clays of either volcanic or granitic origin. And the nature of the stoniness of these soils is super important. The stones are a bit more coarse, a bit more jagged, and Gonzalo shared with me that for some reason Cabernet Sauvignon has not adapted very well to these soils here in Peumo. Cabernet Sauvignon tends to prefer rounded river stones like you would see in Maipo, for example, but it doesn't seem to really like these jagged, more coarse stones, whereas Cabernet Franc has seemed to adapted very well to these particular stony soils. Now, that brings me now to the newest project, the Cornellana Volcano Sedimentario project. And this was really inspired by Gonzalo's passion for his soils and his desire to explore, understand, and express this unique terroir of La Rosa's Cornellana estate in Peumo. And to do this, they brought on world-renowned terroir specialist Pedro Parra to analyze the quality of the soils and also to get a better understanding of the soil's structure and mineral composition. The result isolated a 2.2 hectare parcel of land and 3 grape varieties to focus on: Carmenere, Cabernet Franc, and Syrah. And for the Cabernet Franc, there is 0.5 hectares of Cabernet Franc vines planted here. They were planted in 1999 by Massal Selection using heritage vine material, and the vines are ungrafted. In terms of this 2.2 hectare block as a whole, it sits on a bit more of a northwest facing exposure at an elevation of around 250 meters above sea level. And we're essentially here on like a little plateau right at the apex of these 2 smaller mountain ranges. And because of that, This location has immense geological complexity, which is part of the inspiration for this project. So each of the grape varieties is planted in slightly different soils, but the commonality here is the parent material, which is a type of volcanic sedimentary rock, a type of shale or lutita that has a high degree of fragmentation so that the roots are able to penetrate the rock fractures. In terms of topsoil, it is a silt of volcanic origin, and in the Cabernet Franc block, we have a higher degree of organic matter and also a high mineral content, specifically iron. And there's about 1.5 meters or so of this topsoil before we hit that volcanic shale bedrock. Looking at the viticultural practices in this vineyard, it is farmed organically and drip irrigation is installed, and they will do shoot thinning and positioning throughout the vineyard. And in the Cabernet Franc block specifically, they actually don't need to do any green harvesting because Cabernet Franc achieves a natural vine balance in these soils. Looking at the winemaking for this wine, all of the fruit for this wine is hand harvested. It is all hand sorted and destemmed, but not crushed. And they will add back in 30% of the stems into the fermenter, layered with the whole berries. And the fermentation vessel is stainless steel, a smaller stainless steel, and it will be with temperature control. And in the case of the 2021 vintage, they did use indigenous yeast. And the temperature for the fermentation is a little bit on the cooler side for reds, 18 to 22 degrees Celsius. They will go in and do some pigeage during the active fermentation, just until the wine has fermented dry. And then after that, the wine then undergoes with the skins an extended post-fermentation maceration untouched for 3 to 6 months, which is kind of crazy. That's a really long time, and it depends on the vintage. And in the case of the 2021 vintage, it was 3 months of that extended post-fermentation maceration. Following that, the free run wine is then aged in amphora and used barrels. And then following that, the aging is, 18 months, and then they'll bottle, and then the bottle aging takes place for about 12 months or so. And then in terms of the production for the 2021 vintage, it was about 2,600 bottles. And I should note as well, the first vintage for this project and this Cabernet Franc was 2019. So it's a relatively new project for Viña La Rosa. So let's dive in. So the nose has really a lot of lift, just a beautiful fragrance and perfume. You know, it smells kind of exotic. It smells like Cabernet Franc, but it does smell like it's coming from some place that isn't quite as familiar to me. And I would say that this wine leans a little bit more on the savory side. There's definitely fruit here, but it's leaning a little bit more on that earthy, savory side. And the fruit profile, I would say, leans surprisingly in more of a red fruit space and more sweet, tart fruits like cranberry. There's a little bit of raspberry, a touch of lingonberry here, maybe a touch of blackcurrant, but more red fruit driven. And the earthy profile is really lovely. It's a mix of herbals like sage, wild thyme. There's a little bit of sumac here. Some nice florals as well, almost like jasmine. There's a delicate spiciness to the nose too, but for the most part, it's kind of this earthiness that comes forward. And actually the earthiness also has there's a mineral edge to the earthiness on the nose, which is not as, I normally get mineral kind of on the palate, whereas this is coming through a bit on the nose. And it's almost reminiscent of like a wet terracotta tile in a way. Yeah, the nose is really pure, very lifted. There's a nice translucency to the nose as well. It's really interesting. It's really compelling. Let's dive into the palate. On the palate, those same more red fruits come through in a really nice way. The earthiness comes through in a really beautiful way as well. And there's even more layers to that earthy profile. Still feels quite stony to me, but there's a little bit of a graphite thing going on as well, which is really quite nice. In addition to that, there's all of these spice layers on the palate, which are, I would say it's very peppery. Yeah, it's like a mix of peppercorns, pink, green, white, black peppercorns. This is wonderful peppercorn melange. That sumac comes through in a really nice way. In terms of the acidity is zippy, it's energetic, it's surprisingly elevated. Like, it does have this wonderful punchy acidity. The tannins are lovely. They're firm, they're finely woven. There's a tautness to the tannins as well. Like, there's kind of this tension to the tannins. There's a nice uniformity to the tannin structure as well. But the tannins are nicely managed. I would say medium profile on the tannins. You know, this is not super, super grippy. And they do have a nice chalkiness on the finish as well. Yeah. What's remarkable about the palate is it does lean a little bit on the riper side, riper than the nose at least. So you do sense that this is coming from somewhere a little bit more sunny, perhaps a little bit more warm, but it is just at this beautiful ripeness level. It's really quite impressive. We often think of Chile as being these, you know, big red wines that are a little bit on the riper side, a bit more voluptuous. And there is some flesh here, but it definitely has a much more restrained ripeness level as well. In addition to this, on the palate, there's some other nuances here that I want to mention. In particular, it's kind of almost umami-like, which is really interesting. Like, there's a salty, saline, and almost like a little bit of like a mushroom thing going on as well. Yeah, it's lovely. There's so many layers to this wine. It's really quite impressive. In terms of the overall profile, I would say it is medium-bodied. It's more svelte, more lean, and there is this lightness. There is this levity to this wine, and almost like ethereal type character, which is really quite impressive. You know, it's not presenting in the way we would typically think of for a Chilean red. It definitely has a lot more restraint, more finesse, and just, yeah, it's just got this kind of nice weightlessness to it, which is really, really pretty. Yeah, it's just such an interesting, complex, really intriguing expression of Cabernet Franc, and it's not at all like anything that I expected when I was, you know, going to taste this wine and do this video. It is definitely showing in a much more terroir driven way, and it almost feels like that earthiness profile that comes through. It's almost elemental. Like, it doesn't feel like vegetative, like green earth. It feels more like stones, rocks. Yeah, it's like earth, wind, fire, air, water, like all of those kind of elements, those earth elements is really coming through. And it really feels like this is just this wonderful harmony between the grape and the place, which I think is super, super impressive. It's compelling, it's thought-provoking, it has this kind of avant-garde nature to it. It's a really surprising wine, and it feels so authentic. Like, I've never been to this vineyard. I've had the pleasure of seeing many photos and watching some videos, and I had the pleasure of chatting with Gonzalo and Cynthia and Ricardo, the team from La Rosa, to get a better understanding of this site. And you know, I feel like while it's still early days for this project, I really do feel like they are really striving to kind of let the Cabernet Franc work with the terroir in a way that really lets that terroir and that uniqueness of the place come through. And actually, Gonzalo mentioned to me that of the 3 grape varieties that they're working with at for this project, Cabernet Franc is the one that isn't so to speak, fighting the terroir. You know, he said that there is this wonderful harmony between the Cabernet Franc and this volcanic sedimentary rock and the silt and everything to create this expression of the place, where he said that the Carmenere and the Syrah both tend to want to push their varietalness a bit forward more and tend to not be quite as reflective of the terroir as what the Cabernet Franc is. And, you know, that makes me, A, really happy, and B, you know, it's not surprising in a way. You know, when there's good terroir and Cabernet Franc is in nature, in harmony with that terroir, beautiful things can happen. I've always said that Cabernet Franc can be a mirror for a great site, and clearly this is a great site that has a lot of character that it wants to express. And while, like I said, it is early days for this Cornellana Volcano Sedimentario project, it is one that I am going to be following with great detail, because I think that this is quite a compelling example of Cabernet Franc from Chile, and not what we would typically expect from Chile either. So this is definitely one for folks to put on their radar. The retail price of this, there is distribution globally to a certain extent. The retail price is around 39 USD, which is pretty good for a wine of this quality and of this character and intention as well, I should say. But it's delicious, and it's just such a delightful expression of the variety, but also, as I said, it really speaks to a special place in the world, and I think that is worth its weight in gold for sure. If you've had the pleasure of tasting the Cornellana Volcano Sedimentario project Cabernet Franc, I would love to know what you thought of it in the comments below. Or if you have another favorite Cabernet Franc from Chile, I would love to know what that wine is in the comments below. And of course, as always, I'll be back again soon with another wine. Cheers.